Welcome into another episode of Everything is Logistics, a podcast for the thinkers in freight. We are proudly presented by SPI Logistics, and I am your host, Blythe Brumleve. I am happy to welcome back in for the second time in 2023 Brian Glick. He is the CEO over at Chain.io, and I was just telling you this. I was sort of fangirling for a little bit here, but anytime I see your name as far as like an interview guest on a podcast or, a YouTube video, it's an immediate save to my library because I'm going to learn something new every time. So thank you for coming back on the show, and excited to dive into this conversation.
Well, I'm flattered and also now a little nervous that I have to live up to that introduction, but I'm sure we'll make it happen.
Yes, definitely. Now, for folks who may not be familiar with your career history, sort of give us that eagle eye view of your history within logistics space. I believe you were a former freight forwarder. Also involved in technology across the space. I think for about 25 years now. So vast amount of experience. I don't think I covered it all, but did I come close?
Pretty close. So again, I'm a college dropout who got a job running wires under desks at a customs broker in 1999, and they had to explain to me what customs was and what broker was, and really genuinely said, I'm going to do this for 3 months and then find something more interesting. And 24 years later, haven't found anything more interesting yet than this whole global logistics space. I had a software company at one point before this one that did customs related tariff management for big global brands, and worked inside of forwarders. Lucky to be one of the few people, I think, who has run IT and sales activity, and really kind of has always been able to kind of bring that all together.
And now for since you brought it up, I was going to save my my fifth grader questions for later on in the show, but you brought up that that you were explained to like what a freight forwarder is. And I think for a lot of my audience, they're more on the the US based like freight brokerage side of things. Can you explain, like, as a fifth grader, the differences, or there's a lot of similarities between freight forwarders and freight brokers, but what are maybe some key differences between those two fractions?
So probably the biggest difference between a freight forwarder and a freight broker from a domestic versus international side is that when you're a freight broker, you live very much in this kind of transactional world of I've got to buy and sell, and I'm load to load, and it's whereas a freight forwarder on the international side, you're managing a process that has a lot more parties involved. So there's customs, there's, you're working with a customer across both air and ocean, and you're become more of a travel agent, which is an analogy that people like to use, and then it breaks down really fast. But so you're dealing with a more complex process that starts in another country and has a lot more parties that you're trying to coordinate than domestic brokerage, which tends to be it's you, it's the trucker, it's the customer, and the facility it's being picked up and delivered, but you don't have 150 different companies involved.
And so it's a lot more moving parts.
It's a lot more moving parts, but it's also a little more stable in the sense of you tend to be doing repeat business, and you're not like bidding on every load. And like I've worked with freight brokers as well. That what freight brokers do is a much more intense process. What freight forwarders do is a more complex process. So you're more consultative with your customers.
Oh, interesting. Because I would imagine with everything that's gone on in the market over the last few years that it's just been a situation of where forwarders and brokers are explaining what's going on in the world to shippers and trying to help them understand rate fluctuations.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think really the difference, I've always felt that like freight brokers still live in a world that feels like a boiler room all day, every day, right? Where's fuel going? What can I get? How can I fight for this load? It's a very intense process, and certainly all of my forwarder friends are going to be mad at me for saying that what we do is less intense, because we have entire vessels stuck in ports and airlines that aren't moving things, and you can't get it in and out of this airport and this and that and the other. It's still chaotic, but it's more the relationships tend to be a little bit more longer and stable with you're saying, okay, well, I'm going to help you with this trade lane over a period of time in a way that is you're able to kind of step back from it a little bit than that kind of raw intensity of, that you see sometimes on the brokerage side.
Yeah, because I would imagine with brokers, you might be even lucky to have a conversation
Right.
with your shipper. It's more or less like you're playing defense instead of being on the offense. Is maybe that a safe comparison?
Yeah, and then when you look at like a customs broker, you are in a very long-term decade or multi-decade relationship because you're dealing with compliance and you tend to be doing quarterly business reviews with your customers, and you often have 100% of their business, or you're one of two or three people, so you're even another step back from that transactional world and into a deep. So there's like all sorts of different levels of relationships in this industry depending on kind of how commoditized the thing you do is to the customer you're doing it with.
See, this is why I love having you on the show, because you can break down these complex things that feel complex from the outside. Because and this is part of, your goal as a company, Chain.io, connecting the industry silos, because there are so many silos within this space. I spent the better part of the last, decade working in an asset-based freight brokerage, and I had no idea about maritime. I had no idea about customs brokerage and freight forwarders. And so you just shed a light on, a whole other set of perspectives that I wouldn't have even thought of. So great start to
And
today's
here's where
show
the
already.
humility comes in, because I do want to be very honest about what I know and I don't know. I've worked in companies that have had freight brokerage arms, but I've never had to live the life. And the
Hmm.
one thing I've learned in this industry, everything that seems simple, someone else, there's like 1,000-foot hole of complexity under it that you have no idea about. And then every one of those has another 1,000 holes underneath it, right? Like I say, oh, customs. There's like a million subtopics under customs. And I'm sure that everything that the person at the desk across the hall from you in a big company that you think looks so simple, like accounts payable or receivable or whatever, they're all infinitely complicated. And so we all have to bring a lot of humility to like the fact that, oh yeah, that other thing is always easy and what I do is always very complex.
And I was going to save some of these questions for later, but since we're already on the topic, I saw that you had posted on LinkedIn a little while ago talking about some tips for forwarders to, have these conversations with their shippers and what kind of topics that they should be talking about. I'm curious as to, what are some of those strategies? And I wonder if there's any similarities between brokers and forwarders that they can kind of borrow from each other to continue to have these educational conversations with their customers.
Well, the good news is, as you and I are recording this, we just did a webinar about an hour ago on that topic, so it's very fresh in my mind, and we'll get you the link for the notes. But the the big topic that we see for any logistics provider who's going out and talking to a shipper now about next year is remembering that like 2018, 2019, we were talking a lot about innovation, and then the world fell apart. And then the world fell apart, and all we were talking about was we can get stuff done for you. We can get loads moved, whether that load doesn't matter what mode that load is on. We can get something somewhere was a good enough answer. And then we all hit a downturn, and then it was okay. We'll figure out how to be cheap and get the loads moved. And now there is some indications that we're heading towards potentially some sort of recovery sometime in the year, or at least a new norm, like a stabilization, and that it's now time to go back to those customers and start thinking a little bit more like we were talking in 18 and 19 about here's how we're going to help you be better
Hmm.
as a company. Be more on time and full, be more reliable to your customers, and we're going to bring tech to the table, but we're not going to BS you and say that okay, tech and AI or whatever is going to fix everything. But that I think the customers are now going to be in a position where they're more open to real business value from their providers. That as long as you bring it to your customer with a business term first, not with a tech term first. We're going to help you be more on time and full. We're going to help you be more cost effective, more reliable. And here's the tech we're going to bring to the table to do that.
What kind of, I guess the technology solutions that there's, because we're going to talk about AI, of course, later on in this episode, but I'm curious as to what you think the perceptions have evolved around technology over the last 25 years. Over the last few years, it feels like it's just been a wave of hope and decline. But I'm curious, is that the normal? Is that the sort of the normal attitude towards technology, or is it very slow to change, slow to that resistance?
So in 2001, I had supply vendors and telling us XML files are going to fix everything. All the things will be better because of XML files. In 2007, I had software vendors telling us, and people don't even use this word anymore, but service-oriented architectures are going to fix everything. Give Oracle or IBM $1 million, they will implement a service-oriented architecture, it will re-envision your company, and it will fix everything. So these cycles are forever. There's no time where we won't be in a hype cycle on something. But at the same time, every one of those things makes us incrementally a little bit better. So as long as you don't get too excited or too disappointed when the cycle doesn't turn out to reach its full potential, you can see this steady progress over decades. And I mean, I think the biggest difference, though, the people in the industry that I grew up with who said, I don't want to change, are not in the industry anymore. Like even the people, the quote unquote old people in the industry now grew up in a generation where they already had a home computer or they already, knew about innovation. There was a time where we had people who would come in every day and say, I don't want to change. I just want to drive around the country and visit my customers and get them drunk and get us another load. Right. And that was how business was done. So like we don't have to fight that fight anymore. Everybody understands that tech is helpful, which just now the question is which tech is helpful.
And that's a perfect segue into my next question, because as we sort of end out, we're in Q4 of 2023. Everybody's budgeting and looking forward to 2024. What does sort of the current tech landscape look like relative to the biggest logistical problems that we're facing?
I think what's really interesting and exciting, but not sexy, is that the tech landscape is more mature than it's ever been. So pre-pandemic, 2018, 2019, everybody was talking about new things. I was at a conference earlier this year. I can't remember which one, and somebody was really disappointed. They're like, there's nothing new here. These are all the same vendors that were here last year. They're all just telling us the same stuff. And I'm like, that's a good thing. Because now you can start asking about ROIs, right? And you can start like having mature conversations with the vendors that are still here, because a whole bunch of them aren't, because they've gone out of business, or because they've been gobbled up into other things, or because their idea wasn't that great, or it was too cutting edge. And now we're in a world where you can talk about a business problem, and there's probably a vendor somewhere, once you've identified the thing you want to improve. I want to be cheaper. Right? Well, here's all these automated rate management or rate calculation engines that are going to help you always have the lowest bid that still gets you margin, right? Or I want to be the strategic solutions provider. Well, here's all these software that can help your customer with network planning, right? And get up to that next level in the C-level conversations about, where they should be putting their inventory so that you can move it more efficiently. You don't have to it's not all about what's the new tech. It's about picking the tech that aligns to your business, because there are mature software companies now. Whereas I think we went through I would say there was a bunch of software companies in the early 2000s who did amazing things in TMSs and order management and all of that. And then there was sort of this gap where like there was nothing new, and then there was all this new stuff around machine learning and AI and APIs and all of this. Well, now those companies are more mature, and now's the time to be able to start delivering on projects that actually show value.
And so, as you were talking, you had mentioned a couple different phrases because I looked at your LinkedIn. I pretty much stalked it earlier today in order to come up with some good questions. And I loved this article that you posted about a blog back in 2018 talking about logistics tech buzzwords for 2019. And you mentioned words like blockchain, AI, APIs, Internet of Things, etc. And for AI, you called it back in 2018. You said it's real, it's here, and it's going to be everywhere.
I did. And I also said, if I recall correctly, and I don't have the article in front of me, that I caveated that with, you know, but you have to find the right solutions for it,
Hmm.
right? That nothing fit like I said before, nothing fixes everything, right? So, my prediction on blockchain back then was that it had some very specific use cases, but they weren't universal use cases, right? And there was going to be some things around compliance, some things around digital twins where it might be interesting. Um, and with AI, I think it is going to be pervasive in the same way that we don't talk about software now that has databases, right? Every software has a database. It has a data store. Well, there was a time when that was a new concept. And now it's literally in everything, right? Like everything you have can store data and retrieve it. Like you don't like there was a time when that sounded weird or innovative. AI is going to end up like that. Like it's going to be in things, but it is not in and of itself a thing that you don't buy AI. You buy a solution, and this is the one thing I'm going to bang on for the next 25 years. You buy a solution to a business problem, and if your software vendor uses AI to solve that problem, great. If they don't use AI to solve that problem and they still solve that problem, also great, right? So ask them why they're using AI and what value, what extra value it's bringing to you.
Yeah, because I think that for a lot of business, especially over the last year, ChatGPT was launched about a year ago. It was the fastest app to 100 million users, so it's becoming that just sort of like a common phrase of, oh, AI is going to take all of our jobs. That just sort of doomerism, around just the concept of technology. But if you were calling these shots back in 2018, and some of the freight executives that I've spoken to, they're already using AI, but
Mhm.
not in the same way that ChatGPT, large language models, that sort of infrastructure. So if you could maybe highlight some of the use cases that AI is playing a role in logistics tech right now, is it mainly just parsing through all of the different data sets?
So AI is a marketing term, right? So people put a lot of things underneath it, right?
Hmm.
So the thing we were using in 2018 was generally machine learning, and it was about taking past information and trying to predict the future. Okay, so this has been all the loads we've ever moved. And so therefore we think based on combining that with weather data and demand data and economic data, we think that the next load is going to be this price. Right? That was the machine learning revolution. And large companies that have enough data or software vendors who aggregate data have kind of like that's already an accepted thing. What we saw with ChatGPT and these large language models is this idea of getting closer to solving creative problems or filling in kind of finishing thoughts, right? So before we connected, I was writing a blog post, and every blog post I write now, I use AI to help me think through the problem. So, I'm writing a blog post about our position as a neutral software company and what that means for our customers. So I gave ChatGPT like 6 bullets of kind of what I wanted to get out, and then let it write a longer blog post for me based on my original thoughts. And it kind of fleshed out some things where I was like, hey, that maybe that point isn't as clear as I thought or what. And then I used that to rewrite, right? Well, that's a different kind of technology. And, where is that going to be useful in the day-to-day life outside of, the marketing department or like we use it internally now. It's very good for helping coders finish their code. It's very good. We use it from a strategic planning process to I encourage my team. I'm like, if you have a thought for a new initiative, put it into AI and have it like give you the ideas of how it would write a PowerPoint around it. And sometimes it brings up other ideas, but it's a jumping off point. It's not a finishing point. In the day-to-day logistician's life cycle, You're going to talk to chatbots now more than you ever did, and you may or may not know it. And they're going to seem more human. But it's not going to replace jobs. It's going to just change jobs. And every technology revolution, somebody says this is going to replace all the people, right? Sewing machines are going to replace all the people, and whatever else, everything since then. Um, Jobs, there are always people whose jobs disappear because that skill is not needed anymore, and other jobs that get created, and unfortunately they're not always evenly distributed where the same person can move to the other job, which sucks. But I don't think this replaces all the jobs in logistics. I think we're gonna, every time we solve something, we invent a new problem to have.
It's like a whack-a-mole. Like
Yeah.
every time you knock one down,
Yeah,
there's
or we
others
just
that
go, how
pop
can
up.
we go further? I mean, like the idea of e-commerce, I mean, like e-commerce just changed so many things in the way that we move boxes around. But it created a whole new set of jobs of like people who like the first machine learning application I ever really saw in practice was one of the parcel carriers using machine learning to figure out what carton sizes they should carry in facilities that were now being disrupted because they used to move huge shipments to retailers and were now having to move parcel, right? E-com. And so they were using it to figure out, well, how many cartons do I need to have and what sizes when I have people buying these very mixed orders. Like that job of the machine learning guy who had to figure that all out, and it was a guy. Um, his job didn't exist before all of this.
Yeah, I mean, like social media coordinators,
Yes.
podcasters, those roles didn't exist, 10, 15 years ago, unless you were a very early adopter in a lot of those different platforms. Do you foresee, how we talk to, like ChatGPT for ideation and things like that? Do you foresee that happening from like a logistical standpoint for maybe like a customs broker where they have a specific issue and they can talk to their own data set of their own large language model that's personal to them? Do you see or do you foresee a situation where that might happen and that might be beneficial?
Absolutely, yes. What I think we are much further away from, and I'm going to use the self-driving car thing here, right? Every year it seems like next year they're going to be here. Um, the idea of that system making the final decision, I think we're pretty far away from. Much, much further than it feels. But the idea that, look, if the other day I was trying to do a contract with someone, and I know you do not use ChatGPT to be your lawyer. That is a really stupid thing to do. But there was like, I was trying to remember this one concept around exactly how to phrase this one thing in a contract that I did 100 times, and I just went into ChatGPT and I described the problem. And it was like, oh, you're talking about this. And then I was like, okay, it like brought me back into it. So if I'm a customs broker and I'm like, hey, my customer, like, I don't remember exactly this thing, but my customer is trying to figure out how to save money on bringing stuff in from South America. Maybe that prompts you to remember that there's the Dominican Republic, Central American Free Trade Agreement, and then you're back on track, right? Like that's where it's valuable, not in finishing the whole free trade agreement program for that customer.
So it kind of
So,
sounds like, ChatGPT in particular is very much a core part of your day, which maybe wasn't the case a year ago.
oh, absolutely. And again, it's a core part of my day. And I'm glad that I've been through a few technology cycles, so I know when it is should not be a part of my day, right? And I know that it is not the only part of my day, but I find it to be you know, the same way that there was a time when Google was not a part of my day, right? And I now use Google a lot to do searches to figure things out that I used to have to. I mean, I physically am old enough to have had encyclopedias in my house, right?
We did
So,
too.
right? So, like, that's better, but it doesn't mean that I have outsourced my entire brain to Google, just parts of it where Google's good at it. And ChatGPT is going to be the same thing, right? It's going to help us with things, but we're still in the driver's seat for that self-driving car is not going to be self-driving for a very, very, very long time.
Are there any other use cases for AI in logistics outside of maybe like ChatGPT, of course, but outside of maybe their own machine learning, or is that machine learning essentially the only use case in
No,
logistics?
I think that there's so many things around image processing and all of the things we can do nowadays. I mean, I see these demos of, I can't remember who it was. Somebody just bought a bunch of Boston Robotics robots that can unload a trailer autonomously, right? And it's like a suction cup and an arm. But they show you in the demo what it sees and how it's able to process the real world and use all of these algorithms to figure out the boxes. And okay, if I pick this box up from the top, everything's gonna fall out the bottom, and like all of these things. But it's so pervasive that I think that's what you're going to see. It's just everything's going to have a little of it, but the thing you're buying is unloading the trailer faster, not AI for AI's
Hmm.
sake.
Yeah, that I think that's super important to keep in mind. And now, reflecting on the buzzwords that you predicted in 2018, what are some of those buzzwords that you're predicting for 2024? Not to put you on the spot or anything, but what are some of the, I guess, the buzzwords that you're thinking about that maybe is going to be around for a while versus something that probably won't be?
I mean, I feel like AI has sucked all of the air out of the room, right? And kind of rightfully so, right? Because the potential genuinely is there. Um, what I still don't think we've fully exploited IoT, and I know we don't it's not as buzzwordy now, but we've got look, you've got your ELDs, but on like the ocean freight side, we're just starting to see the carriers invest in putting IoT on the containers, right? And what happens when you can start using that data to do things that we haven't even thought of as possible before. A lot of the carriers are just putting Starlink internet onto the vessels. And so now I've got to connect a container on a vessel with internet access, and I've got a perishable product or a temperature control product in that thing, and I can, understand that, certainly I can't take a helicopter out to that ship if something goes wrong, but I might know that I have an at-risk product 20 days earlier now in my process because that container was compromised in some way, right? And this is all new to us, and I think that we've got like this fun foundational infrastructure going in for IoT, but we haven't started exploiting it yet. The innovation that's going to come on connected world and this bridging of the physical and the virtual world, the biggest companies in the world are just scratching the surface, and the rest of us are just kind of waiting for it to be more accessible.
And when you talk about the Internet of Things, is that more or less just digital twins, replicating, the real world environment and a digital environment, or is the Internet of Things more encompassing of a lot of different
I think
sectors?
it's more than digital twins. So digital twins is like a really interesting thing if you've got a lot of data and a lot of modeling and you're, trying to do all of these things. But if I import, I've got a friend who exports from Colombia, like, let's say 20 containers a month of sugar. He's not building a digital twin model of his 20 containers a month, but if he can get more data around where those containers are and whether they're actually moving and whether that's being stored properly, like that's meaningful information to him. And he can take that information and do things that are less of a marketing glossy and more of just my freight provider can now tell me the position of that container on a ship when containers fall overboard on that ship. I have another friend who she had lost containers off of a vessel out of Vancouver, sort of on the tail end of the pandemic. There were storms and they fell overboard. It took her weeks to find out whether her containers were the ones that fell
Hmm.
overboard. We had 20,000 containers on a ship. She had, let's say 10 of them. The odds are low, but you don't know. When everything's connected,
Hmm.
right? That container is now on the bottom of the ocean. It's no longer online. Like that kind of stuff, or you know, on the roadside. I mean, just as these things converge, the ability to really know, okay, I know they said that this dock is going to be open, but can I see that that dock is actually available as I'm pulling into the yard? And like all of these things, when there's sensors everywhere, really practical little things get easier, right?
And
The
so,
same way as like paying with your phone versus like having to go get cash, right? Like it's not sexy once you're doing it, but oh my God, was that amazing the first time?
and so that's such a great comparison because you think about those friction points of the half a second that it takes to take out your wallet and pay for something versus just tapping your phone is something that we never knew that we needed until we just started getting used to doing it. And so when we think about some of these larger sort of logistical problems that we're trying to solve, essentially customers just want their freight there on time and reliably and hopefully at a cheaper rate than what they were paying, maybe the previous year before. As a business owner that, is providing these logistics solutions, how do you know, or maybe what questions should you be asking to figure out where that technology fits into your business so that you can explain those little moments of frustration that you've eased for the customer?
So I think my personal superpower when I'm out talking to our customers is being willing to ask one question. What is your boss being judged on? Okay, so I'm talking to somebody in logistics. Okay, well, who do you report to? Well, I report into the head of supply chain. Okay, well, what's he being judged on, right? Or what's she being judged on? And so if they say, oh, well, we just had this thing where now every one of our executives has a CO2 emissions part of their bonus this year. That's new. So, well, now I know what to talk to you about. Right now, I know how to separate myself from all the other freight brokers in here because what I'm going to talk to you about is how we're going to reduce your idle time, which is going to reduce your emissions footprint and make your boss happy, right? And so, when we all everyone in freight lives in a somewhat commoditized environment. Right? At the end of the day, there's boxes and they move places. Um, Being able to listen and hear what your particular customers care about, then talk about technology.
Hmm.
If you open the conversation by blabbing on about the new tech you've installed, you don't know how to make the customer care about it. If you listen to them, then you can figure out how to take the tech you've invested in and tell a story that matters to that customer.
I love that, especially from like a marketing standpoint.
Yeah.
So many marketers would be best served to listen to those types of statements and then craft your messaging around those problem areas. And as we sort of dive into the problems that are existing for a lot of these different business leaders and how maybe technology can fill the gaps and solve some of those problems. There was another post that you had mentioned about the I guess not the value, but the potential value that you could gain from not having what did you call a disconnection debt in organizations. Can you explain what that is
that
and
was
why
a
it's such a
Harvard
problem?
Business Review term that they came up with. I don't think it rolls off the tongue very well, as you just proved. Right? I don't actually like the words, but there's a world of haves and have-nots when it comes to technology and supply chain. Right? You go to Walmart, you go to Georgia Pacific, you go to these big, Siemens, and they've got all this connectivity and all of this stuff in these dashboards and what have you. And then there's this huge chasm, and then there's all of these people who have email and texting, and that's their TMS, and there's some Excel sprinkled in there somewhere. The disconnection debt is that even in those big companies, when those big companies are interacting with the small ones, or even inside the big ones, and that they don't like to talk about this, there's somebody who's logging into a carrier website, looking at the status of a load or an ocean container or an air freight move, and then retyping it into that other system so that it's magically automated to the customer, right? Those people are all over this industry, and every one of them is introducing latency and inaccuracy and, fixing that, like making sure that the basic wiring of this giant machine that we're all part of is not people, is often ignored because it's not sexy. But I had a conversation a couple years ago with a a freight forwarder in Asia who was saying they couldn't buy integration and software to solve this problem because their labor was so cheap there that they couldn't justify replacing it with software, right? Because if you're paying somebody, a dollar, $2 an hour, you got to get a lot of efficiency from $100,000 piece of software. Then they came back and they said, okay, now I have to do this because my customer is showing real-time statuses to their customer, and no matter how cheap my labor is, they can't type fast enough and they can't type accurately enough. So the value of that, solving that digital disconnect or whatever, that I think I got that right.
Disconnection debt.
Disconnection debt, right? We're never saying that again. But solving that problem of these, I always call it swivel neck. I've got this monitor and that monitor, and I got to type it from this monitor over to that monitor, is now about so much more than just labor savings. It's about real-time visibility and accuracy. And so you have to solve it even if it's expensive now.
How do you know when enough is enough when it comes to technology?
When you can't explain it to your CFO, and if you're a small company, you don't have a CFO, go ask your spouse whether the money that could be coming into the bank account is better invested in this. And if you can't explain why, then you've hit enough. Like, real simple.
Yeah.
Like, if you can sit there and you can't, look, if you're running a business, whether you're a one-person shop or whether you're UPS, you've got two numbers. You've got the number at the top, which is how much money you bring in, and even the money at the bottom, which is how much money's left. And you can put all sorts of magic inside of there. If you can't tell yourself which of those numbers you're impacting, you're not doing the right project. Right. And it's, I love CFOs because they are wonderful at having very excited young people come into their offices and making them walk out with their heads down and going, oh, I know, but it was so cool.
And that's, I think I suffered this earlier this year because I just felt myself, just sort of really diving into the world of, ChatGPT and even Claude and, Google's Bard to some extent. But between all of those platforms and then learning, maybe like a new CRM or a new video editing tool, it just felt really overwhelming. And it caused, a big delay in my overall production value and then my overall, concentration value. So I'm thinking about, other maybe, small business owners that are working in freight that may be experiencing some of this just almost like overload of technology solutions and analysis by paralysis or paralysis by analysis where you're not exactly sure which tool to dive into. So as a small business owner, how do you make those decisions on what to invest in and what not to invest in?
So the first thing to remember, and I will say this to everybody who's out there listening, and everyone is going to nod their head and agree with me, your TMS sucks. Right? Your TMS sucks because the job that a TMS does sucks. And the data that's coming into it is garbage. And the thing it does is hard. And it's never exactly how you want it. It's never optimized. But the TMS you're going to change to also sucks. It sucks for a different reason in a different spot. Yours is amazing at real-time tracking, and that one sucks at real-time tracking, but it's better at billing the customers. Right? So the bar for introducing something new into your business should be higher than it's new. And it should also be higher than what I don't love what I have today, because you're also going to have problems with the next thing. So I think the bar for introducing new technology in most companies is actually too low, which is a scary thing to say as someone who sells software for a living. But it is. I think that, and the size of company matters a lot in that. If you've got $1 billion bottom line, go invest some of that in some things that are going to fail. If losing 20% of your revenue because you got distracted is going to put you out of business, stick with what you got because, or buy something that 40 of your friends are already using successfully, right? Get some real world referrals. Don't be on the bleeding edge if it matters.
So I
If
think
it's
that that's probably a good place to sort of jump to with you and your company
Mhm.
and the services that you guys provide. For folks who may not be, familiar, can you kind of give us an overview of some of the solutions that you guys are offering over at Chain.io?
Yeah, so what we do is our slogan is we move the data that moves your freight. So what we do is we connect all of the systems, whether it's your applications, the shippers applications, the different software companies, the freight audit and pay tools, all of these different things have to communicate electronically. We have plugins so that instead of having to do an IT project every time you want two things to talk to each other, you take plugin from system A and plugin from system B. And in many cases, they work together very smoothly. In a lot of cases, there's a little bit of tweaking that still happens. We don't like to oversell what we do. Um, so we're this network that lets all of these things connect together so that when you do live in a world with lots of software, that software is communicating with each other instead of the swivel neck of I've got four monitors now and I've got to take stuff from this carrier website and put it into my TMS, and then I also have to go into 4Kites for my customer and manually key it over here, and into Project 44 for this other customer and key it over here, and into this and that. Let's get all of that smoothed out, and then I have to retype my invoice 3 times because I need to put it into my customer's freight audit platform and my accounting software and my TMS. That noise is the foundational underlying crap that drags profitability down. And it's our job to get that stuff to go away.
And I would imagine that, process mapping is something that regularly has to be done at some of these companies that are looking to implement some of these solutions. Is
So,
that a safe assumption?
yeah, so when we demo our software, the first thing that we show is that when you go to create a new integration with us, the words that come up on the screen are not XML and JSON and API and blockchain. They are advanced shipment notice, freight billing, rate and quote automation, customs clearance, business terms. Because the hardest thing in integration in supply chain is the fact that we all use different words to describe the same thing: a pro number and a bill of lading, a load tender and a booking. They're all the same stuff. And getting people to agree on, okay, well, like once the computer's automating something, it has to be repeatable. And we all have to agree what we're actually doing here. So you go to a global company and you say, how do you quote the customer? Right? I say, well, okay, in Malaysia, they send us this electronic message and we send it back. In Spain, they call the office and then they kind of make up a number and then we sort of sort it out from there. In the US, we go and we load up, an index tool and then we add 5% to the index and then that goes back to them over an email. So, okay, well, now we all have to agree on how to do that if we're going to automate it. By bringing in integration software, it forces those conversations. And so some of our customers have said to me that most of the value they get from our software is in the first month of the implementation. And then they're willing to use it to do all of this, but the value is that it got everyone on the same page.
Which I imagine is such a nightmare for a
Which
lot of
is
these
our clients,
companies
our
to go
client
through.
success team does a lot of therapy as part of our service is also organizational therapy.
So in addition to organizational therapy, you mentioned earlier about how AI has really sort of sucked a lot of the oxygen out of the room when it comes to technology advancements. Is there anything around logistics tech that we should be paying more attention to?
Carbon,
Hmm.
CO2
Emissions.
emissions, especially here in North America, we're woefully behind, and California is going to get us all caught up real quick with not just I know everyone on the trucking side is well aware of the actual physical emission standards and the like, but also carbon reporting.
Hmm.
And so globally, within the next couple of years, and dates are different in different spots, basically everyone who's publicly traded is going to have to report on what's called scope 3
Hmm.
emissions, which is not the emissions your company does, but the emissions that everyone you buy goods and services does, which means even if you're a small provider, you are going to be in someone else's scope 3.
Hmm.
So you go, okay, it only applies to billion-dollar companies in California. I'm not a billion-dollar company, but I move loads for Target. Target's a billion-dollar company who operates in California. Therefore, Target is going to come back to me and ask about my carbon emissions. And so applying the tech to take your ELDs and get that emissions, but also things like your corporate travel and the emissions on those. And so being educated on the tech that is being built, and it's very frustrating right now because it's all early days and all the regulations are different and everything's chaos, and like it's not pleasant right now in the emission space. But if you're not at least learning the words, if you don't know what scope 3 emissions means, you're behind.
Hmm.
If you are already invested in technology, you are already able to give granular reporting to your customers, you're ahead. If you're in between those two things, you're probably on the right track.
And so that I would say that probably sounds like a safe assumption to, at least have on your radar
Yeah.
to implement for 2024.
Yeah. I mean, it's if you're not actively understanding it, and it's a little embarrassing that I have paper on my desk, but I have like the Greenhouse Council white paper on emissions on my desk at all times now, because it is a complicated topic, but the literature that's out there is actually not that hard. It's got graphs and pictures and shows you, okay, if you're here in the supply chain, this means this to you. If you aren't becoming fluent in the language, it's, I'm trying to think of a good analogy here, but like there are, things like PODs, right? So, there was a time when like you were pretty cutting edge if you were even talking to your customers about electronic PODs. Now it's given, right? But we all had to learn that language together. We're in that language learning phase right now. And so if you're not learning the language of emissions, you are going to be playing a lot of catch up towards the end of next year.
How, as a technology company, how are you and your team staying educated to help your customers stay educated?
So we see our job is to be out there, and we have a partnership team who goes out and talks to every other software company in the industry that's willing to give us the time of day. And we learn and we listen. And then we also talk to our largest customers, these big multinational forwarders. And then we have regular meetings, and every one of our customers, again, like another sort of hidden value, is they meet with their client success managers regularly, and we try to feed back what we're hearing. And we never recommend a particular piece of software because we're neutral, but we will say, hey, if you're not doing something in CO2, you're going to be behind. Here's the 6 providers in the space. So you don't have to go do all that research and get started, right? And then we'll make those introductions and we'll facilitate saying, okay, well, the big guys in general are really looking at rate and quote automation right now. Here's some providers in that space that you can go talk to. So we help the executives at our customers, especially the mid-sized ones, distill the noise. What categories should they be investing in? And then we introduce them to the software companies that can help them in that space. But we don't provide a preference of this one's better than that one, so they can trust us.
I'm curious, taking it, a little bit of a different direction for these last few questions. I'm curious as to, what motive, who, do you have any sort of mentors or people who have been super influential to you in your career and your outlook? Because it's always get the presence that you are very positive and very much like eager to help other companies solve these complex problems. So I'm curious as to who maybe who is influential to you.
So I can give you 3, only one of whom I directly worked for. So there's a woman named Catherine Cooper who was my boss for a number of years, who's been very influential in my career in teaching me as a nerd how to interact with other people and how to like understand that relationships are as important as facts. And so she was very influential. There's a company called 37 Signals, which is a software company. They have a couple of products called Basecamp and Hey. I don't use their products. I used to use their products many years ago, but they were very influential in one of the first like fully remote companies and building a culture of like empowering people in a business to go make decisions and get things done. And they wrote some books about this. And I went to one of their first in-person seminars like 20 years ago. So that team, and then from afar, and we know each other now, but I always very much admired John Urban, who's now running Slink, but it was really the GT Nexus was what made him famous, and his ability to see that you had all of these parties in global PO management and order management and origin supply chain, and that you had to make software that brought value to all of them, or it wasn't going to work, right? And that ability to kind of see that global network and then build software that was going to rise, be the rising tide instead of moving value between different companies, which really became what I needed to do with Chain, which is, we draw this triangle. I've had it since before I started the company. Shippers, logistics providers, and software companies. And anything we do should be adding value to that triangle, not moving value around that triangle.
I love that. No, I mean, I feel like that would be a perfect place to end this interview, but I do have some questions.
However, there's a quiz round.
But we do have, one of the audience seems to really enjoy this segment. I call it the Relatable 8, 8 questions that I'm asking each interview guest over that we've been doing this for a couple months now. So I always get some fun, I would call them like break the ice type questions, but this at the end of the interview, so it's not really breaking the ice anymore. All that to say, let's get to the first one, because you're very good at like podcast interviews, very clearly, as evident of this show. But how do you think about marketing when it comes to you and your company?
Create value and don't overthink how you're delivering it, right? We do our podcasts, we do our LinkedIn presence, and we don't get our job is not to become Coca-Cola. So we try to add value. We try to make out good content that people like. And then because of that, they like our company.
What is your favorite social media platform and why?
For business, it's still LinkedIn. The only other platform I'm on at all anymore is Reddit, and that's anonymous because I think it's a really good place to see what people are really thinking.
Yes, I would co-sign that for sure. Reddit is I have a secret anonymous account, and then I have my public facing,
I have like 5 of them.
Right. You got to be a little cautious on that crazy platform. Okay, what is your favorite SaaS tool that you use every day and can't live without? It cannot be your own.
Don't worry, I don't. That won't be a problem. My favorite SaaS tool that I use every day and can't live without is still Slack. I mean, it's just so effective.
What about your favorite freight business that isn't your own?
I am not allowed to answer that question because of
yeah,
our neutrality,
I guess you did
right?
It.
What I will say is that I think that that entire space of pricing and rate calculations and all of those things is so unbelievably hard and fascinating to me that everybody operating in that space globally just has my admiration for tackling a hard problem.
Yes, very, very well said. And you did say that earlier that you didn't want to, you wanted to be a neutral party. So, all right, next one. What's one task in your current job that you can't stand doing?
Legal compliance, like government filings and all of the I have to sign this document for this state and all. It's just so much noise for no value for the customers.
Yeah, I echo that statement because I just went through a whole issue with the Florida Department of Revenue. They kept sending me notices about how I owed $20 to them. And I just said, I don't feel like calling the government to deal with this. I'm just going to pay the $20. I don't know where this bill came from. And I spent months, sort of going through this issue. And then, of course, after I paid the bill, a month later, I get a check in the mail from a rebate from the Florida Department of Revenue.
Try unregistering a legal entity in New Hampshire. I'm just going to put that out there.
Sounds like a nightmare that costs a lot more than $20.
Yes.
So, but it just goes to show, sort of the I guess the lack of progress or process optimization, I should say. All right. If you didn't have to worry about money, what would you want to do for the rest of your life?
Work on food security. It is ridiculous to me that in modern society, there are people who don't have enough food to eat and that we can't get the food that they need to them. It is whatever measure you make of our society, the fact that people go to bed hungry is absurd.
That's why I love
that's my one thing.
the Feeding Northeast, or there's Feeding, I think
Whatever, many of them,
Feeding
yes.
whatever. Feeding Northeast Florida is one that I really admire what they're doing, is because they take these donations from local stores and farmers, and they help with the logistics of getting that food to folks in need. And they also go the extra step of to almost hide certain food donations, especially for kids in classrooms and things like that, where they will partner with schools and they'll take the food and they'll discreetly put it in the child's backpack, and so that they can take it home, and so they're not necessarily made fun of at school. Anyways, great charity.
And just a reminder for everyone, the thing that the charity you care about values most is your money, not your in-kind services. So always donate money where you can.
Absolutely. They're better equipped to make those decisions than we are. Okay, last couple ones. What's something you believe in that most people don't?
That there's no such thing as rules. There are only consequences. So everyone says this is the rules, this is how this has to be done. This is, as long as you're willing to accept the consequences of your behavior, you can literally do anything.
Spoken like a true tech executive.
Yeah.
All right. And last one, a little bit of a fun one. What's your favorite supply chain or logistics fact?
Oh, man. My favorite supply chain or logistics fact is, and the numbers vary depending on who you ask, but I'll just say that there are in excess of 100 companies involved in every international shipment.
Oh, wow.
Right? That when you start counting the customs brokers and the origin trucking agent and the freight audit and pay company and the customs bureau and the company, that the 3PL that's managing the origin warehouse and the destination warehouse and the transloader and the trucker and the you end up with over 100 companies. And we all still get things to get places every day, which is a miracle that it ever works. And we do it millions of times a day.
Which is why I love quotes like that, because you bring the tech positivity to the ecosystem, which I think we need more of. Now, I guess for lack of a better phrase, are there any questions that you feel like I should have asked and didn't, or any statements that you would like to make that you feel is important as to sort of close out this conversation?
Well, I think you just hit on the one thing, right? If there's one thing that I just want everyone in this business to hear, it's that we make minor miracles happen that would be considered magic 200 years ago. I have a t-shirt in Shanghai, and 48 hours later it's on a kid in Little Rock is magic. And we all crap on ourselves all day, every day. We all have very low self-esteem about the technology and all the things. And we should all remember that we're doing magic every day and appreciate that even when it's hard.
Wonderful way to close out the show. Brian, where can folks follow you, follow more of your work?
LinkedIn. Used to be that other platform, but they renamed each other and I lost track. So just check me out on LinkedIn.
And we'll be sure to link to all the things in the show notes just to make it easy for folks, and also to check out chain.io in case you are looking, which you probably are, looking at your different integration capabilities for the coming year. So Brian, as always, great conversation, great insight, great perspective. Thank you again for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.